Most owners laugh off the Zoomies as random silliness. A dog suddenly sprinting in wild circles around the living room, skidding across hardwood floors, bouncing off the couch, and then stopping just as abruptly as they started. It looks absurd. It looks like pure chaos. And for the most part, people treat it exactly that way. They pull out their phones, film it, post it online, and move on with their day without giving it a second thought. But here's what most people don't realize. Your dog isn't being goofy. They're not randomly short-circuiting. What you're watching is a highly specific neurological event, a carefully orchestrated biological process that the dog's brain is essentially demanding happen. And once you understand what's actually going on beneath the surface, the Zoomies stop looking funny and start looking fascinating. What scientists call frenetic random activity periods, or FRAPs, are not a quirk of domestication. They're not a sign that your dog has too much energy, needs more exercise, or didn't get enough sleep. FRAPs are a documented stress-discharge behavior, and they're rooted in the mechanics of the parasympathetic nervous system. What your dog is doing in those 30 seconds of absolute chaos is self-regulating their own cortisol levels. They're performing a biological reset. And the fact that they can do this at all, spontaneously, instinctively, without any training or outside intervention, is one of the more remarkable things about how the canine brain works. To understand why this matters, you have to start with stress. Not stress in the dramatic sense, not fear, not trauma, not anxiety in the clinical meaning of the word. Stress in the physiological sense, which is something that happens in the body of every living creature, every single day, in response to completely ordinary events. Every time a dog experiences something stimulating, a new smell, a visitor arriving, the anticipation of a walk, the sound of another dog outside, the energy of playtime ending their adrenal glands release cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream. This is a normal, healthy, necessary response. It's the body gearing up. It's the engine revving. The problem is that once the moment passes, the body needs to come back down. The engine needs to stop revving. Cortisol has to be metabolized, adrenaline has to be cleared, and the nervous system has to shift out of its heightened state and return to baseline. In humans, this happens through a whole range of mechanisms. We exercise, we sleep, we cry, we talk through our feelings. We take long showers and call our friends and lie on the couch watching something mindless. We've developed an enormous vocabulary of self-regulation strategies, and we use them constantly without even thinking of them in those terms. Dogs don't have that vocabulary, but they have the Zoomies, the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch of the autonomic nervous system responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery plays a central role in what happens during a FRAP, when a dog's body has accumulated enough physiological arousal that staying still is no longer tenable. The nervous system essentially trips a switch. The dog goes from 0 to 60 in an instant, tears through the house or the yard in a pattern that often looks circular or figure-8-shaped, and then stops. In that burst of explosive movement, they're burning through the accumulated stress hormones. They're forcing blood into the muscles. They're activating motor circuits that override the arousal state. And when it's over, the parasympathetic system can finally reassert itself. The cortisol comes down, and the dog often lies down and goes to sleep within minutes. This is not accidental. This is the body doing exactly what the body is designed to do. What's particularly interesting about FRAPs is the timing. Pay close attention to when your dog gets the Zoomies, and a pattern emerges almost immediately. After a bath, after a vet visit right before dinner, at the end of a long play session, after you've been gone all day and you've just walked through the door, these aren't random moments. They're moments of transition. Points where the dog's body has been in a heightened or suppressed state and is now seeking equilibrium. The bath creates a kind of forced restraint, a period where the dog has to stay still and tolerate something mildly unpleasant, while arousal builds with nowhere to go. The moment it's over, the body releases. The vet visit is similar: sustained tension, sustained stillness, and then freedom. The Zoomies are the exhale. The premial Zoomies are slightly different and involve a different flavor of arousal. Anticipation, it turns out, is physiologically stressful in its own right. The brain's reward circuits are activated in anticipation of a pleasurable event. Food, in this case, and dopamine starts flowing before the actual reward arrives. The dog is essentially vibrating with expectation. Their body is prepping for something good, which means it's generating arousal, just as surely as if something frightening had happened. The Zoomies let that energy out before the meal lands. and afterward the dog can eat calmly and settle. This points to something important about how we tend to misread our dogs. We assume that zoomies after a bath mean the dog is happy the bath is over, and they probably are, in some sense, but the more precise thing happening is that their nervous system is completing a cycle that was interrupted. Ethologists, people who study animal behavior in naturalistic contexts, use the phrase displacement behavior to describe actions that animals perform when two competing drives are in conflict, or when a behavioral sequence gets cut short. Zoomies share some features with this concept. The dog wanted to run, or wanted to escape, or wanted to release energy, and they couldn't, and now they're completing that circuit. Dogs aren't unique in this. FRAPs have been documented across a surprising range of species. Cats do it, elephants do it, horses do it. They're called mad gallops in equestrian contexts, and riders learn to account for them. Even some zoo animals exhibit FRAP-like behavior under the right conditions, which tells us something important. This isn't a product of domestication. This is an ancient mechanism. This is something the mammalian nervous system has been doing for a very long time because it works. What domestication has done, arguably, is create more occasions for it. Wild canids operating in natural environments are in more or less constant low-level motion. They're hunting, traveling, patrolling, sleeping in bursts, and moving again. Arousal builds and dissipates in a more continuous rhythm. The domestic dog, by contrast, spends long stretches in enforced stillness in the house, in the crate, in the car, punctuated by relatively short bursts of activity. Arousal accumulates in a different pattern. The valleys are deeper and the peaks are higher, which means the need to discharge is more acute and the discharge itself is more dramatic. This is also why younger dogs tend to zoom more than older ones. Puppies and adolescent dogs have less developed inhibitory control. The frontal lobe equivalent in the canine brain is still maturing, and they're also experiencing the world with a freshness and intensity that older dogs have largely habituated to. Everything is new, everything generates arousal, and the bucket fills fast. A puppy can zoom 5 or 6 times in a single afternoon. A senior dog might zoom once a week, or once a month, or barely at all, not because they've lost the mechanism, but because they've built up a larger capacity to metabolize arousal through other means. They've learned, over years, to self-regulate in quieter ways. The role of cortisol in all of this deserves more attention than it typically gets in popular discussions of dog behavior. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone in dogs, just as it is in humans, and it has a half-life of roughly an hour to an hour and a half in the bloodstream. But here's the thing that surprises most people. Cortisol doesn't just vanish when the stressful situation ends, it lingers. A dog who has a stressful morning, say a thunderstorm at 7 a.m., is still carrying elevated cortisol at noon, even if the storm ended hours ago. This lingering cortisol means the dog's nervous system is still primed, still slightly on edge, still more reactive than usual. What happens if they can't discharge that arousal? It doesn't evaporate. It stays in the system and accumulates with the next stressor, and the next, until the dog is operating in a state of chronic low-grade stress that manifests as hypervigilance, reactivity, difficulty settling, or behavioral problems that seem to come out of nowhere. The Zoomies, from this perspective, are not just cute, they're necessary. They're a pressure valve. And a dog who gets to zoom regularly is a dog whose nervous system is being regularly reset. This has real implications for how we manage dogs with anxiety. Many owners of anxious dogs report that their dogs rarely or never zoom, and this is actually a concerning sign rather than a reassuring one. An anxious dog who doesn't zoom isn't a calm dog. They're a dog who is so chronically stressed that they've lost access to the discharge mechanism. The arousal level is so persistently elevated that the normal oscillation between stress and release has broken down. What looks like stillness is often suppression. What looks like calm is often shut down. Conversely, some owners worry when their dogs zoom, interpreting it as a sign of anxiety or overstimulation. In most cases, this is a misreading. A dog who zooms and then settles is a dog who is self-regulating effectively. The zoom is the problem being solved, not the problem itself. The problem, the accumulated cortisol, the pent-up arousal, was already there. The zoom is just what healthy resolution looks like. There's also a social dimension to FRAPs that researchers have found genuinely interesting. Dogs often zoom in the presence of other dogs, and the behavior is contagious. One dog starts, another joins. And suddenly you have a multi-dog frantic activity spiral that looks like chaos but follows its own internal logic. What's happening here is partly social facilitation. The presence of others amplifies arousal, which accelerates the need to discharge, and partly something that looks a lot like play signaling, the circular running, the play bow that sometimes precedes the zoom. The exaggerated movements all carry communicative weight. The dog is broadcasting something. I'm not threatening, I'm not hunting, I'm releasing. Come release with me. This is why dogs often zoom specifically toward their owners, or at least with their owners in view. The human isn't just a spectator. They're an anchor point, a safe base that makes the neurological reset feel secure enough to attempt. Dogs in unfamiliar environments, or dogs who are genuinely frightened, rarely zoom. The behavior requires a sufficient baseline of safety. You have to feel secure enough to let go, which leads to something worth sitting with. The fact that your dog zooms around you in your house, in your presence, with you watching, is actually a form of trust. It's a demonstration that in this environment, with this person, they feel safe enough to let their nervous system do what it needs to do. The chaos is a compliment. There's a broader lesson here about animal cognition and the imitations of how we tend to interpret behavior we don't fully understand. For a long time, the popular account of Zoomies was essentially nothing. It's just dogs being silly. It doesn't mean anything. There's no story here. And that account was wrong. There was always a story. There was always a mechanism. The behavior made sense. We just hadn't looked closely enough. This happens constantly in the way humans relate to animals. We see something that looks arbitrary or absurd, and we file it under animal weirdness and move on. But animal behavior, by and large, is not arbitrary. It's the product of millions of years of selection pressure, refined and preserved because it serves a function when a behavior is as consistent and widespread as the Zoomies, seen across species, across contexts, across every breed of domestic dog, from the tiniest Chihuahua to the largest Great Dane. It's not random, it's converged. Evolution kept it because it works. The other thing worth noting is how elegantly simple the solution is. The dog doesn't need a therapist or a prescription. They don't need to understand what cortisol is, or why their nervous system is elevated, or what happened 3 hours ago that's still affecting their biochemistry. They just need to run in circles for 30 seconds. The body has already figured it out. The body has been figuring it out longer than our species has been around to observe it. Next time your dog suddenly launches into a full-speed lap around the living room, ricocheting off furniture and skidding around corners with an expression of pure, unhinged abandon, don't just reach for your phone. Take a second to appreciate what you're actually watching. You're watching a nervous system completing a cycle it was built to complete. You're watching hundreds of millions of years of mammalian engineering doing its job. You're watching stress metabolize in real time, cortisol burning away in the legs and lungs of an animal who has, without any help from you, figured out exactly what it needs. That's not silliness. That's biology. And it's kind of beautiful.